and see this unique and fascinating place called Hollywood.
Hollywood's biggest secret wasn't about affairs or scandals, it was about height. For decades, studios lied to America about their leading men. They built trenches on movie sets. They hired shorter actresses. They even paid for special elevator shoes every 6 months. One studio spent over $100,000 just digging holes so their star could look taller. Another had contracts requiring co-stars to be under a certain height. The public never knew. So, how did they fool everyone? Let's get into it. Mickey Rooney. Mickey Rooney was only 5 feet 2 inches tall. That made him the shortest leading man in all of classic Hollywood. But for 3 years straight, in 1939, 1940, and 1941, he was bigger than Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, and Cary Grant. He made more money for MGM than any of them. His small size helped him play a teenage boy named Andy Hardy, even when he was already in his mid-20s. Audiences loved those stories. They made 16 films in that series, and if you count the earnings with today's money, they made around $1.9 billion. Mickey had a boyish face, wild energy, and a body that never looked grown up. That mix made him the face of American optimism during the Great Depression. People saw him and felt a little better, but the thing that made him a star almost destroyed him later. When World War II ended, Mickey came back with a bronze star on his chest. He was a soldier now, but Hollywood didn't know what to do with him. He was no longer a kid, but he still looked too small to play a full-grown man. Casting directors started writing the same line over and over again, just 2 words: height problem. Romantic scenes became strange. He once joked he needed to stand on a box just to kiss his co-stars. His $5,000 per week salary was cut. Studios stopped calling. By 1950, he was working for much less money in low-budget crime films, but something surprising happened. He played a broken boxing trainer in one film and a worn-out fight coach in another. Both roles got him Oscar nominations. Suddenly, his small size didn't look silly anymore. It looked real. It looked tough. Then, in 1979, everything changed again. Francis Ford Coppola gave Mickey a new role. He played a retired jockey in The Black Stallion. This time, his size was perfect. Jockeys had to be small. The movie made $40 million, critics loved him, and he got another Oscar nod. He proved once again that no one could count him out. He had already acted in 43 films before he turned 25. Now, decades later, he was still surprising people. Sammy Davis Jr. was only 5 feet 3 inches tall, but on stage, he looked bigger than anyone else. He was born in 1925 into a family of performers. By the time he was 3, he was already on stage, dancing with the Will Maston Trio. He wore little shoes that had been shined to a mirror glow, and somehow, they always landed right on beat. The crowd couldn't believe it. In the 1940s, nightclubs didn't want to book him. He was young, he was black, and he was short. Later, he would also lose one of his eyes in a terrible car crash. To many, he didn't look like a star, but Sammy didn't care. He turned every reason to reject him into a reason to clap louder. He could do it all. He'd play the drums like Gene Krupa. Then he'd switch to singing like Frank Sinatra. Then he'd dance so fast your eyes couldn't follow. And when people finally started noticing his height, he didn't hide from it. He made it part of the joke. I'm a one-eyed Negro Jew, and on top of that, I'm short, he'd say. The audience would burst out laughing. Then he'd silence them with a song like Birth of the Blues. Even in 1964, when he was cast in the Broadway musical Golden Boy, producers worried again. Sammy was 5'3". His leading lady was tall and Swedish. They thought it would look strange. Sammy didn't argue. He trained harder. He practiced boxing scenes until his punches blurred. He demanded lighting that made his shadow stretch across the whole stage. The show sold out before it even opened. He got a Tony nomination. One review called him the littlest heavyweight in town. In Las Vegas, hotels once refused to let him stay on site. By 1968, everything had changed. He was making $35,000 a night. His contracts said the audience had to be integrated. He had to stay in the best suite. No one could say no to him anymore. That's how powerful he had become. He released over 50 albums. He had a Billboard #1 hit with The Candyman in June 1972. He acted in 38 films. He got nominated for Emmy, Grammy, and Tony Awards. In 1987, he was honored by the Kennedy Center. In just 1 year, 1965, He raised about $750,000 for Martin Luther King's organization. That's more than most stars made for performing. James Cagney was never 5'9", no matter what the studio claimed. His Army records said he was 5'5", and his biographers agreed. That made him 4 inches shorter than the average American man in his time. In the 1920s and 30s, that kind of thing mattered. Leading men were supposed to look big. They were supposed to tower over the villain, the girl, and sometimes even the camera. But Cagney, he had to be filmed from the knees up. Sometimes he stood on crates. Sometimes he only acted next to shorter actresses. And even then, people were told he was taller than he really was. The newspapers printed the lie like it was fact. Meanwhile, Cagney laughed about it. He once joked that he had to jump just to reach his own punchlines. But the truth is, none of it ever held him back. He turned his small frame into pure force. When he moved on screen, he charged. In The Public Enemy from 1931, he slammed a grapefruit into Mae Clarke's face, then stormed around the room like a coiled spring. You couldn't take your eyes off him. That energy wasn't just for movies. In real life, he took on studio bosses too. In 1936, he climbed onto a studio golf cart so he could look Jack Warner in the eye. Warner was 6 feet tall. Cagney was demanding equal pay with Edward G. Robinson. He got it. Directors learned fast that Cagney's size wasn't a problem. It was part of the power. Raoul Walsh even built a whole ending around it. In White Heat, Cagney runs through an oil refinery, climbing ladders and sprinting across catwalks while explosions go off behind him. The camera follows him every step, ducking and weaving to keep up. No tall actor could have pulled it off without hitting the ceiling. The budget was over $1.3 million. The movie made all of it back in 6 weeks. Even when he played real people, the height never got in the way. In Yankee Doodle Dandy, he played George M. Cohan, who was actually 5'6". Cagney was an inch shorter, so the dance numbers were changed. His tap routines were sharper, tighter, faster. Some critics still talk about the way those steps hit like a machine gun. It became the movie's signature. By 1999, the American Film Institute ranked him the 8th greatest male star of the classic era. Nobody cared about his height anymore. It had become just a small detail. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson was just 5'5". He didn't look like a Hollywood star. He didn't even speak English when he first arrived in New York. He was 10 years old, fresh off the boat from Bucharest, and the only languages he knew were Yiddish and Romanian. He wasn't handsome. He wasn't tall. And when he stood on a Broadway stage, no one thought, leading man. Casting directors saw a short kid with a round face. But Robinson turned what looked like a weakness into a weapon. He stood in front of mirrors for hours, practicing the way his lips curled, how his eyebrows dropped, how his voice hit like a hammer. When people laughed at the idea of a tiny gangster, he barked back with a voice that filled the room. Then came Little Caesar. The date was January 9th, 1931. Robinson played Rico Bandello, a ruthless mob boss. And something strange happened. Audiences didn't care how short he was. He owned every scene. He didn't need to stand taller than the other actors. His presence made them smaller. Time magazine said his 5'5" frame fills the screen with menace. That was no exaggeration. Warner Brothers got nervous. They thought theaters might not buy a crime boss who had to look up at everyone, so they faked his height. The studio said he was 5'9". They shot him from low angles. They made taller actors slouch or sit on stools. But the numbers told the real story. Little Caesar cost about $280,000. It made more than $1.5 million in the middle of the Great Depression. Robinson didn't just prove them wrong, he rewrote the rules. By 1933, Robinson was earning $85,000 per film. That's close to $2 million today. And he didn't just get a paycheck, he got something rare, script approval. That was usually reserved for stars like Clark Gable, but Robinson had earned it, one scene at a time. Off-screen, his size became part of the story too. During World War II, he volunteered for dangerous frontline USO tours. When asked why, he joked that a 5'5" target gives the Nazis half the chance. Behind the joke was something real. He was brave, and he didn't stop giving. Over the years, he donated more than $250,000 to anti-fascist causes. He also built an art collection worth $3.5 million by 1956. Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin was only 5 feet 5 inches tall. That made him 4 inches shorter than the average American man in the 1920s. Back then, people thought movie stars had to be tall and commanding on screen, but Chaplin didn't care. He turned that idea upside down. He created a look that made him even smaller. Huge trousers, a coat that was too tight, a little hat, a thin cane. This made him look like a child in grown-up clothes. But when he started moving, everything changed. He ran, spun, tripped, and danced with wild energy. In The Kid, he ran beside tall policemen, yet the camera couldn't look away from him. He made the audience forget his size. Directors had to pull the camera back just to fit him in frame. That short height became a secret weapon. In 1923, he earned $125 million for A Woman of Paris. That was 5 times more than Douglas Fairbanks, who stood at 5'9". Chaplin's popularity was unmatched. And behind the scenes, studio memos revealed something strange. His smaller size meant the camera needed less film to capture him fully. That small detail helped cut production costs by 12%. His size also made people feel closer to him. A study done in 1925 at Columbia University found something surprising. When people watched Easy Street, their bodies reacted more when a tall bully lifted Chaplin by the collar. Skin sensors showed a 38% spike in stress. Viewers felt protective. They wanted him to win. Chaplin knew this. In City Lights, he faced off against a boxer who had a much longer reach. Instead of fighting with strength, Chaplin used clever footwork. He dodged punches like it was a dance. The crowd loved it. Even though sound had entered movies, his silent performance got loud applause. Off-screen, he was just as smart. In 1919, he helped create United Artists. He sat at the same table as Mary Pickford, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith. Each got an equal share. During their first meeting, Chaplin said something that stayed with the company. Physical inches matter less than creative control. By 1952, his fortune had grown to over $50 million. If we adjust that for today, that's more than $590 million. Even after leaving the United States during the Blacklist era, his influence never faded. His height may have been small, but his shadow stretched across the world. Buster Keaton. Most stars back then were tall, strong, and loud. Buster Keaton was none of that. He was only 5 feet 5 inches tall, but somehow, he became one of the biggest names in silent film history. He was born in 1895. His real name was Joseph Frank Keaton. When he was just a small boy, his father added him to their vaudeville act. But this wasn't a sweet father-son performance. His dad literally threw him around the stage. He had a suitcase handle sewn into the back of Buster's costume so he could swing him like luggage. It looked brutal, but that's how Buster learned to fall. Off stairs, off sets, off rooftops, without getting hurt. He learned how to twist midair, how to land on his side, how to protect his head every time. That's where the magic began. In 1917, he moved from stage to screen. Suddenly, all that painful practice had a new purpose. His short build actually gave him an advantage. His center of gravity was about 85 centimeters off the ground, which made him more stable than taller actors. A physics professor once said that Keaton could survive hits that would knock down someone 6 feet tall because his body was 10 to 12% harder to topple. And Keaton didn't waste that gift. He did stunts no one else would even try. In Sherlock Jr. from 1924, he grabs onto a train's water spout. It dumps 2,000 liters of water on him and throws him to the tracks. What no one knew was that it fractured a bone in his neck. He kept filming, not realizing the break until doctors found it in an X-ray 11 years later. That wasn't even his most dangerous moment. In Steamboat Bill Jr. from 1928, a 4,000-pound building facade falls straight toward him. It misses his head by only 3 inches. He only survived because he'd carefully marked an exact spot on the ground the night before and stood on it without flinching. By 1927, Hollywood finally noticed. He was making $3,500 a week. That's around $60,000 a week in today's money. He even had his own studio. But people still joked about his height. In The General from 1926, huge Civil War soldiers stood beside him like he was a lost drummer boy. In Our Hospitality, actors wore stilts to make him look even smaller. Instead of getting upset, Keaton leaned into it. He stayed stone-faced through all of it. His expression never changed, even when the world around him was chaos. That blank look became his trademark. People called him the Great Stone Face. Then sound arrived. In 1928, MGM took control of his films. He lost his freedom. His career hit a wall. But in the 1950s, something unexpected happened. TV brought him back. He appeared on The Twilight Zone. He did a beer commercial in 1957. People who'd grown up in a quiet, post-war world watched this strange little man fall off things with a kind of grace they had never seen. Peter Lorre. Peter Lorre was only 5 FT5 in. Some said even shorter. But it didn't matter. On screen, he felt massive. You'd watch him and forget his size. In 1931, he played a child killer in M. His face sweated under harsh lights. His eyes jumped like something wild and caged. That look burned into people's minds. Some Berliners thought they saw him on the street and called the police. It caused panic, and it helped sell over 400,000 extra tickets in just 3 months. He left Germany in 1933. Alfred Hitchcock noticed him right away. Hitchcock didn't care about height. He cared about energy, and Peter Lorre had it. In The Man Who Knew Too Much, he blended into crowds, but the camera found him. His presence was like a warning bell. When he got to Hollywood, the studios played with the contrast. They made posters showing Little Pete beside 6 FT4 in Sydney Green Street. People loved it. Theaters told Variety that when both actors were in a movie, ticket sales jumped 22%. Instead of shrinking from his small frame, Lorre leaned into it. Between age 27 and 40, he got over 300 role offers. Many paid more than $3,000 a week. That's like $55,000 a week in today's money. By 1946, his Warner Brothers contract gave him top billing. That almost never happened for actors under 5 FT6 in, but he earned it. He didn't just act, he haunted the screen. When he died in 1964, the New York Times said it best. They called him a short, pudgy man who could still take over every scene with his own special kind of evil. Burgess Meredith Burgess. Meredith stood at 5 FT5 and a half. Not tall, not flashy, but his voice filled rooms. On stage in 1935, the director thought he was too small to hold his own next to a tall co-star. So he told Burgess to project like he was shouting across Times Square. Burgess did. He hit the back wall with his voice and shook the theater. On opening night, the crowd gave him 29 curtain calls. That kind of noise gets attention. Hollywood came calling fast. For his very first contract, he made $25,000. That's over $550,000 today. He never looked like a leading man, so he became something better. The underdog, the odd one out. His role in Of Mice and Men in 1939 felt desperate and real. Critics said he was the tallest man on screen that night. During World War II, he entertained troops in North Africa. He once stood on an ammo crate, so 8,000 people could see him. War reporter Ernie Pyle saw his strength and picked him to star in the story of G.I. Joe. That role won him Best Actor from the National Board of Review. In 1951, politics hit him hard. He got blacklisted, but he adapted. On radio, nobody saw how tall he was. He recorded more than 3,000 shows and ads to survive. When TV opened new doors, he turned shortness into power. As the Penguin in Batman, his top hat and shoes made him larger than life. Kids couldn't get enough. That role earned him a mountain of fan mail and a 6-figure royalty check. And then came Rocky. He was 68. Playing Mickey, the grumpy trainer who barked, "You're gonna eat lightning and crap thunder." That line alone became movie history. The film was made for just $1 million. It earned $225 million, and Burgess got an Oscar nomination. Lou Costello was just 5 feet 5 inches tall. In 1930s Hollywood, that usually meant no chance of becoming a leading man. But instead of letting that stop him, Lou turned his height into his biggest strength. Next to Bud Abbott, who stood 6 feet tall, Lou looked like a wide-eyed, roly-poly kid, and he leaned into it. That contrast, short guy versus tall guy, became the heart of their act. Lou wore tight suits, spoke in a high-pitched voice, and kept shouting, "Hey, Abbott!" while spinning in frantic circles. It looked funny, it sounded funny, and it worked. By 1941, their film Buck Privates made over $10 million. It had only cost $180,000 to make. That's a return of more than 5,400%. People didn't just laugh, they roared. Lou didn't just act funny. His size pushed him to be more creative. He learned to fall harder, trip better, and make everything look more dramatic. A stumble from someone small like him always looked worse, always got a bigger laugh, but he wasn't weak. Back home in Paterson, New Jersey, teenage Lou Costello, who once boxed under the name Lou King, had gone 11 wins, 0 losses, and 1 draw in amateur boxing. He also won the city's basketball free throw contest twice. That's while shooting from a full foot below the usual height. His reflexes were so sharp that in the 1920s he even worked as a stuntman. Very few comedians could write their own gags and then pull off their own falls. Lou could. His height even played into how he did business. In 1936, when Abbott wanted a bigger slice of the pay, Lou pointed at himself and said, "Audiences pay to see the little guy squirm." By 1941, it was Lou who took 60% of the profits. When they toured during the war in 1942 to sell war bonds, Lou climbed onto tanks and bar counters just so people in the back could see him. They sold $85 million worth of bonds on that trip. That was enough to fund an entire aircraft carrier group. By the middle of the 1940s, Lou Costello was making $250,000 per movie. That's about $4 million in today's money. But being funny didn't protect him from pain. On November 4th, 1943, just before he was about to go live on NBC, Lou got a call. His baby son, Lou Jr., had drowned in their backyard pool. The show was about to start. Lou went on stage anyway. He performed the full "Who's on First" routine perfectly. No one in the crowd knew what had just happened, but when the lights went off and the microphones were silent, he broke down in tears. That moment changed how people saw him. He wasn't just the short, silly one anymore. He was strong. Alan Ladd publicly, Paramount said he was 5 feet 6 inches, but behind closed doors, people said he was actually 5 feet 5. Studio records show that between 1943 and 1956, he ordered 2 pairs of special 2-inch elevator shoes every 6 months. The studio paid for them and called it wardrobe maintenance. Why? Because Ladd's big break came in This Gun for Hire in 1942. He played a calm, cold contract killer. His co-star was Veronica Lake. She was just 4 feet 11. Together, they looked perfectly matched, like statues, but smaller. That look worked so well that Paramount even added a clause in his contract from 1944 to 1949. Every woman he acted beside had to be 5 feet 4 or shorter, unless the studio agreed in advance to dig trenches or build platforms. It got wild. On the set of Shane in 1951, the director ordered actual trenches to be dug so that Van Heflin, who was 6 feet tall, would walk lower than Ladd. They dug 1,250 feet of trench. It cost $8,700 back then, about $100,000 today. In Boy on a Dolphin in 1957, Ladd acted with Sophia Loren, who stood 5 feet 8. Greek builders made a special 140-foot boardwalk raised 9 inches just for him to walk on. Loren walked beside it in the water. Even then, the camera team had to tilt the angle by 5 degrees and squeeze the frame just to make it look right. They jokingly called it panavertical. But the funny thing is, all these tricks didn't hurt his image. They made him more famous. Every time a newspaper talked about boxes or trenches, fans loved it more. By 1953, Ladd was one of the top 10 box office stars in America. He earned $150,000 per movie, and also got a cut of the profits. That was more than Gary Cooper made that same year, and Cooper was 6 feet 4. Ladd's son later said that people saw him as the little guy who wasn't scared of anyone. He didn't need to be tall. He had that cold, quiet power that made you believe he could still win. In Shane, that power hits hardest at the end. The camera shows him as a tiny figure against big mountains, facing danger alone. Then he says the final line, "There's no living with a killing." It feels heavy because it comes from someone who had to fight for every inch of space.